Next on Garden Line, the Prairie Arboretum in Freeman. Learning about caring for orchids.
Very easily grown in the home or in the small greenhouse, garden window. This is in South Dakota.
And what pests are common to orchids.
This program is funded in part by Swiftel Communications.
Welcome to Garden Line. I'm Tammy Watson. Tonight on our show we will go into a greenhouse to learn about caring for several varieties of orchids, and we'll look at several orchid varieties and learn about common orchid pests and find out about how to control them. Later in our broadcast we'll visit our featured Garden of the Week. We will feature the Prairie Arboretum in Freeman, South Dakota. And as always, your questions will be answered. Get ready to call in with your questions about gardening, lawn care, weed control, you name it. Our panel is ready to go. Joining me in the studio to answer your questions are John Lundgren, USDA Research Entomologist.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thanks. Chris Dorovtsov, Minnehaha County Extension Horticulture Educator.
Good to be here.
Also with us here tonight, Larry Osborne, Extension Plant Pathologist.
Thanks, Tammy.
And rounding out our panel is Mike Mechnig, Extension Weed Specialist.
Great to be here, Tammy.
All right. The phone number for you to call is 1-866-595-SDSU. Again, 1-866-595-7378. Helping answer the phones tonight are the Coteau Prairie Master Gardeners. And remember, when asking your question, please provide them with as much information as possible. Explain when your problem first appeared and whether or not any surrounding plants have been impacted. Now, we'll keep going. Before we get to your questions, we have a really interesting story for you. Garden Line visited with Paul Johnson, a professor of entomology at South Dakota State University whose hobby is growing orchids. While we were in the greenhouse with Dr. Johnson, he showed us several varieties of orchids and explained about their care.
Good evening. I'm Paul Johnson. I'm a professor of entomology at South Dakota State University, but I do orchids as a hobby, and along with my wife and many other people in the state. We're going to talk about orchids for a few minutes this evening. Just a quick introduction. We've got some of the common orchids that we grow in the state in homes very easily. These are the Phalaenopsis or moth orchids. We have Dendrobium orchids right here, and then we've got several varieties of so-called Oncidium orchids, which are hybrids between different species, and they have various characteristics. So just a few quick comments. First thing I would like to say is that orchids are very easily grown in the home or in the small greenhouse, garden window, these sorts of situations in South Dakota. We have plenty of light, but they do need plenty of moisture and humidity at certain times of the year, especially during the winter. They do like room temperature conditions, and so you don't have to turn the furnace up very much, and you don't have to turn it down at all during the winter, although you might need to use your air conditioner during the summer. These are very easy to take care of, especially the Phalaenopsis orchids, which are very common and can easily be obtained at markets and nursery in South Dakota. They're very colorful, come in a wide variety of styles and varieties. They like the room temperatures. They need to be watered frequently. It's best not to use really heavy water, so if you can use rainwater or distilled or deionized water, that's the best thing to do if possible. These are really good because, as you can see by some of the scars, they continue to bloom over a long period of time, and so you can have flowers all winter long from one plant when you have them in a situation that they enjoy themselves. Here we have another color variety here, which is very common, and so you can have quite a selection if you go to the right markets and find what you'd like. Another common variety is the Dendrobium, which takes a little bit drier and more sunnier conditions than the Phalaenopsis, but is also easy to grow and is good for south window situations, for example, in the home. Over here, some of the Oncidium hybrids are very easy to grow. They like They like a lot of sun and good moisture. They come in a wide variety of colors. And this one right here, for example, has got a very pleasant fragrance, which is good for those of you that really like chocolate. This one has a strong vanilla chocolate odor, and it's very easy to grow in the home. Some of these other orchids here that you see, we have, for example, the Cymbidium, which is now used as the common corsage orchid. These are very easy to grow and can be kept outside during the summer in South Dakota. And we have quite a variety of different orchids, as you can see, a wide diversity of different colors, yellows, purples, whites. You name it, you can find it in orchids. And don't forget, we also have 23 species of native orchids that grow wild in South Dakota. So for those of you that are hiking, be sure to be watching for them.
All right, we're going to dive into our topics of the week with our roundtable real quick. John, what do you got for us this week that you want to talk about?
Well, the insects love these warm temperatures, and so all of those little critters that have been out in our backyards and in our gardens are starting to become a lot more active, and we're seeing a lot more of them. Something in particular that I've noticed in my backyard when I've been mowing the lawn is the bees and wasps. Now, what we've got here up on the screen is the honeybee, a very common resident in this part of the country. There's a yellow jacket, which is another very common insect that we've been seeing a lot more of. These have been going in our yards for quite some time, but the females have started their colonies, and now this first brood of workers is starting to come out. So it's much easier to identify where those nests are in the yard, and now is your chance to try to take care of those if they're in high traffic areas that you might want to eliminate.
Okay, so it all depends on whether or not they're really bugging me or live and let live.
I think in a lot of ways these social insects like bees and wasps are actually really beneficial. They're important pollinators. They're also really important predators. So if they're not in your way and you're not going to run over them with a lawnmower or something like that, then leave them be, and I think we'll be in pretty good shape.
Okay, thank you. All right, Chris, what do you want to talk about?
Well, one of the common questions that comes into the office this time of year has to do with zucchini and cucumbers not producing fruit. And a lot of times the callers indicate that there are flowers present on the vine. What I usually ask people first is, are there female flowers present on the vine? Now, in the picture there, you can see on the right a female flower. And you can tell this is a female by the fact that there's an immature fruit beneath the bloom. The male flower does not have that. So in order for that female flower to elongate, a pollinator must take pollen and put it in the female flower. Now, I believe the next slide shows a cucumber bloom. Same thing, same family. Both male and female flowers are present on the vine. So the other problem, if you do have the female blooms present, you may not have bees in your yard or pollinators in your yard. Keep in mind that the blooms are only open for a short period of time, about a day. They open after sunrise, they close up by late afternoon, evening, and on a warm day, the bees won't be active during that later part of the day. So you really only have the morning as far as pollination time. I think there's one more slide that shows a variety of zucchini blooms there for you. But just keep in mind, we don't want to be using pesticides when those bees are active. We don't want to be killing off our pollinators, or we'll end up with no fruit on our vine.
Okay, thanks, Chris. That's interesting. If you pay attention, you can see the difference between the male and female. Mm-hmm. I learn something every day. Larry, what do you got for us?
Well, I don't have anything male and female to show you here per se, but getting a few questions. It's been wet all over the state. We're having problems in the vegetable garden with damping off and a lot of other things. But what the most mysterious things tend to be in this family right here. This is a little fungus that I picked out from under some landscaping on the campus here, and this is in the, we'll try and get that a little better angle. This is just generically called little brown mushrooms. Okay,
that's precise.
Yeah, that's precise.
What they say.
We can identify these if we work hard at it, but there's so many of these little fellows that pop up in mulch and in the yard and in lots of places. just generic, and they're not really good to eat. Many of them can be poisonous. It's hard to discern edible from poisonous unless you're a true expert, and really they don't make much of a meal, so these aren't really all that important for mushroom hunters and for hobbyists. This has come up on the show a few times. People always ask us, send us pictures, say, what is it? Is it edible? The standard answer we like to give is we don't recommend you eat any of these things that you find and you don't know what it is, because obviously if you're having trouble identifying it, there's a good bet that you could make mistakes. And many of the poisonous mushrooms look very much like a lot of our edible mushrooms. An amanita, for example, can be deadly poisonous. Looks very much like some of our agaricus, just the meadow mushrooms. Mushrooms like these, again, can be easily confused. But for those people that have done this for years, they enjoy the hobby. It gets them out in the outdoors, a lot of times into the woods and things. It can be a very enjoyable hobby. But again, take the time to become an expert, understand what's edible, what's not edible. Don't play games with your health or take the chance of eating something that is potentially poisonous. Many of these fungi produce toxins. Sometimes they're poisonous in response to something else we eat, like alcohol or something like that. Inky caps are a good example. Some inky caps can be edible. Don't recommend you go out to your yard and pick the first ones you see. But some of those can actually turn poisonous with the alcohol in our system. And that can be maybe 2 or 3 days after you eat the mushroom even. So be very careful hunting mushrooms and picking those things. But in general, these things are not damaging to your yard. They're not a disease. They're growing on dead organic material, so they're recycling nutrients and so forth.
Okay, well, I think I'll take your advice and leave it to the experts and purchase mine at the grocery store, I guess. All right, Mike, what do you got for us?
Well, some people might be, those of you who still have lawn above water level, we might see it starting to change colors a little bit this time of year. And one of the reason for that is because you might have the crabgrass emerging. Here we've got a picture coming up here to show you kind of what you might be seeing in your lawn this time of year as the crabgrass starts to emerge. We see that light color. This is what we generically call as little green weeds, for those of you in the diagnostic arena. But these are crabgrass. You can identify these pretty easily. In the next photograph, if you take a closer look, you'll see little hairs all over the leaves, the stem, all over this thing. That's a pretty good characteristic of crabgrass out in your lawn. So they're just about this size now, and we're starting to become visible. Next photograph, we might see, you might have foxtails. They don't have the hairs all over, but, so yeah, there's different annual grasses out there, but control is really kind of the same for all of them. In the next slide here, we have a few options out there in your landscapes. You can get this, look for a herbicide called fluazafop. It's grass be gone or over the top. Those are things that will have no activity on any broadleaf plants at all, only annual grasses. So that's a nice thing in landscapes. In the lawn, you might get a herbicide called quinclorac, which is fairly new on the market. It might be in the weed be gone plus crabgrass or weed and grass control in lawns, that type of thing. The only thing about the quinclorac is watch out. It will linger on the grass clippings, and so you can't use those clippings in your garden around your tomatoes or your potatoes, that sort of thing. You could get some injury there. But quinclorac, somewhat effective post-emergence, but this is kind of a Band-Aid. The best approach, next spring, use a weed and feed, a crabgrass preventer to get those annual grasses. Okay,
one of those preventatives like weed be gone, could I put that like in my iris bed where I've got grass that's creeping in, or do I actually have to weed and do the work?
Right, that's a good question, because irises seem like a grass, but then if you think about an iris flower, not a grass. And so really irises really aren't a grass, they're kind of a broadleaf plant. So none of those broadleaf type herbicides in there. In fact, maybe that over the top could be used around irises and daylilies and things like that. It'll only have activity on grasses and not things like irises or any other broadleaf plant. Okay. So different options there, but yeah, you don't want to get too confused on that. Non-chemical approach, sometimes people just, if you got crabgrass going to seed in about a month, they'll just bag the clippings and then just dispose of the clippings off to the side rather than return them to the lawn to kind of prevent seed going back into the lawn. So that'll have some effect on suppression, but a good thick lawn is the best non-chemical option.
Okay, there's options out there.
There's lots of options.
All right, thanks. Well, moving on, Garden Line recently visited the Prairie Arboretum on the southwest edge of Freeman, South Dakota. We learned that it is more than just a natural environment for growing trees. This eye-friendly, attractive site is a sprawling 40-acre area of trees, native grasses, flowers, and ponds with more than a mile of walking paths. Here's just a glimpse of what the Great Plains Arboretum has in store. That is really some beautiful video there, and we encourage you, if you get a chance to be down in the Freeman area, to check that out. All right, diving into questions. Question from Brookings about trees. What tree will be able to take standing water and not kill the tree? We live on the river. Good question for this time of year.
I would say anything in the willow family would be pretty good for that. Willows can handle a lot of water, so that'd be a really good choice.
Okay. Now, I've heard willows are kind of dirty trees. Do they all sort of shed or drop a lot of branches, or am I wrong on that?
Some of them can. Some are more of shrubs than trees, so there's a lot of different options out there. So, but yeah, some of the weeping types will drop some branches.
Okay, I guess I need to think that there's more than just weeping willows out there. Okay, next question, and this one is from Chancellor. Woman purchased her plants at a different place last year, and now she has earwigs all over everything. Grass, sidewalk, what can she use to get rid of them? She's never seen them in South Dakota last year. She has seen them in California.
Yeah.
So first tell me, what are earwigs? What do they look like?
Right. Earwigs are small insects. At their maximum length, they're about maybe 3/4 of an inch long. And what really makes them stand out is on their hind end, they've got these pinchers, which actually they can't use to hurt anybody, and they don't crawl into anybody's ears when they're sleeping or anything.
Like, yeah.
No. It's only on Star Trek. Earwigs are, I mean, sometimes they're a little bit of a pest on plants. They're generally kind of opportunistic feeders. If you've got a ton of them, then you probably need to do something about it if they're starting to eat some of your plants in your landscape. I think some general insecticides would that you can get at any lawn and garden store would probably do the job on earwigs there. If they're starting to invade your homes, I think that's another very common problem this time of year. There are some insecticides that you can put in your homes that are specifically labeled for earwigs. You can also try boric acid, which you would put along the baseboards and things. And what that is it's basically an abrasive, such that when that cuticle of that insect, that exoskeleton, their shell, gets scratched up, then they die. So
Okay.
Also non-toxic, so that's another positive aspect of orchids.
Are they more common this year? It does seem like they're really common, at least around my house.
Yeah, you know, they do. They kind of come in phases like this, and you get the right conditions. What are the exact right conditions? It's always tough to say whether it's from this year or from the preceding year, you know, whether it's the seed or the soil. But yeah, you're right. They've been pretty abundant this year.
Okay. Here's a question from Aberdeen. When is a good time to cut down viburnum and mock orange? Caller cut them down last fall, but this year they've only flowered a little bit. So if you're going to prune viburnum and mock orange, what should you be doing?
Well, if they have a big overgrown shrub that's just getting really floppy and lacking flowers, you might want to just rejuvenate the whole shrub by pruning it down to 2 to 3 inches, but we do that during the dormant season. So live with it this year while it's growing, but next March, prune it down to the ground and it'll start growing a nice fuller plant for you. Keep in mind too though, you may have limited flowering next year, especially with the mock orange. You need the second-year-old wood to produce the flowers, so when you cut that off you'll have limited flowers next year, but you'll have a nice overall looking shrub in that situation.
Okay. Larry, I want to pick on you. This is cheating. I had a personal question I asked him about. I thought that I had slime mold in my driveway. Why is this bugging me?
Well, I'm glad you reminded me. I meant to talk about that during Roundtable as well. I made a site visit out to Tammy's house down here in South Brookings, and of course with the abundant moisture we've had, just like with the mushrooms, Tammy, it was very close to what she had was almost a slime mold. It is a fungus. It's actually kind of a mushroom.
It's green. It looks like dark green bubbly gum.
Almost like brains out there.
It's spread out. Yeah, it's not attractive.
It is a mushroom, and of course you had to ask me right when I forgot the name of this mushroom. But anyway, there's 3 or 4 that are very common, different colors basically is how we distinguish those. But it's growing on that organic matter. It could be the lawn clippings. It could just be other nutrient sources that are in amongst the soil and the rocks. It's kind of growing over your gravel. Yep. And if you pick that up, you notice it's kind of got a jelly consistency, but there definitely is a body there. I mean, it's a fungus. And not much to do about that. I don't think we can really apply any real treatment that's going to be effective long term because of the environment, because the lawn clippings continue to come, keeps feeding it. It's probably going to be there a little while. You could maybe try some suppression with, if you wanted to try some fungicide and just see what happened, but outside of that, I'm not really, maybe some of the algicides and things that would control even moss and so forth along your sidewalk. There are products available. Might suppress that a little bit, but in general, the organism is going to survive. Vinegar, there you go. Well, yeah, vinegar works on a lot of stuff in the lawn and safe.
Go out there with a gallon jug and start dumping it, or how should I?
Spray it. Put it in a little spray bottle and just spray it like you would any other type of herbicide. But just table vinegar ought to really
excellent. That's a
back.
Great idea.
I'll
idea.
report back.
Yeah.
I'll let you folks know. Okay, we've got somebody that sent in a photo, and here's the question. This is from Sioux Falls. Our carrots had leaves one day, and the next day the leaves were gone. Did a rabbit that thought his eyes were going to go bad eat them, or is something else going on? There's no fence around the garden. Will the plants survive? Okay, so you can see the image right here. It looks like the rabbits went, or something went to town. What do you folks think?
I would say probably rabbits. I know that they are just eating everything in my yard. So, you too. So, as far as if they'll survive or not, this is definitely going to stunt them and set them back. And I'd say it's not too late to put another planting of carrots in. So if you can get some more seeded elsewhere in your garden, I'd get some started, because by the time these recover, your other planting may be well on its way.
Okay.
Maybe some fencing though.
Oh yeah, get some fencing around your garden. I finally did break down and do that around my vegetables.
Is there a magic way to deter rabbits, or if they're hungry enough, are they just, I join the grand ranks of people that can't believe how much they dislike cute fuzzy little creatures now that I have a lawn.
I think they'd eat the plastic fencing if you put that up.
Yeah, fencing is really the only foolproof way, and you want to have those holes smaller than an inch so that the young baby rabbits can't get through. So that's really the only foolproof way.
Word to the wise. All right, here's a question that was emailed in earlier, and it's from Rural Mitchell. Heavy rain over the last week flooded my garden 6 inches in 6 days. There was standing water on my garden for over 2 days, and the soil can best be described as slop. With heavy clay soil and flat terrain, I don't anticipate it drying up very quickly. My tomatoes started wilting after the second day of submergence and do not look healthy. Potatoes held up a little better, but they too have started wilting. Will they come out of it? How late is too late to replant? And the cucumbers and green beans are a total loss. Okay. So.
No, it's not too late to answer that question. You can definitely get some planting done. As far as if these things will make it or not, you're going to just have to wait and see. At least we're getting a lot of heat in between these rains to help dry out the soil, but it's not too late to plant. So potatoes, I think hopefully those will recover, because you do need the full season for things like potatoes and for your winter squash. I'd say you're about at the last week of planting for things like tomatoes and peppers and eggplant and melon. So I'd get those in this week if you want to have any chance of harvest, and look for shorter day varieties and use transplants. Sweet corn you can put in until July 1st. Beans you can put in until the end of July. Cucumbers and zucchini are very fast. You can definitely put in those until mid-July. So just do some replanting in your garden once it dries out. And of course, don't forget the fall crops. In August, put in more carrots and cabbages and lettuce and radishes and those types of things. So you can still have a garden this year.
Okay, now 2020 hindsight, let's go back in time a year or two. Is there anything this gardener could have done to help their soil to make it dry out a little bit? Anything to, okay, the next time they'll be ready, or just?
It's pretty tough to battle 6 inches of rain anywhere.
They talked about, in previous episodes, we talked about using raised beds as a way to dry things out a little bit, but that's a lot of work if this is a once in a 20, 30 year thing, so I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I don't, maybe you guys have a different perspective on this, but I've never spoken to anyone that's put in raised beds that's been disappointed. Mm-hmm. They're able to get in faster, they're able to manage the moisture. Raised beds, if you put in the time and effort once or twice in a year or two, then
I think it was maybe the Master Gardeners in Aberdeen, or one of the groups out there we were talking to this year, and one person was complaining because there's a little bit more moisture management, because they don't hold the moisture quite as well as if they're lower. So there are maybe some minor management challenges, but yeah, otherwise, yeah, it's a growing thing.
If I decide I want to do that, where's a good place to get information about how to construct, or what I need to do, worry about the soil that I put in?
I know I have a couple links at my office. I don't recall them offhand, but anytime you do a search on the internet, I guess what I recommend is just search raised beds and extension, and you'll get some high quality sites that come up in your search engine.
Okay, so make sure I include that extension, and then it's going to target into the good science-based information that you guys have. All right. Okay, probably coming back to you, John. Caller from Arlington wants to get rid of slugs. They're eating the hostas and strawberries. Beer is not working, apparently, on the slugs. They have ground, no mulch, bare ground, no mulch, help.
Well, whenever I have slugs, I always drink a tall beer, and that makes all the problems go away. So I don't know what this caller's having issues with.
No, that's a way of
that is
tackling,
a very
right?
commonly put forward as a very common way of taking care of slugs that probably doesn't work all that well. I think slugs are a tough one because they spend their days under the soil, and they're very hard to hit with insecticides. If you're dealing in cropland, that's one thing. You can manage your cropland in ways that would reduce slug densities and improve natural enemy populations. But for the home garden, slug baits are supposed to be one of the best things out there for them. So these are small little bits of food that you buy down at your lawn and garden center. They have insecticide or slugicide in it, and the slugs come along, eat that, and they're taken care of.
Okay, I've got another kind of home remedy I want to ask if that works. I have heard that put sandpaper around the base of your plants, and if the slugs won't like to crawl across the sandpaper.
Oh, that's a great idea. That gets back to the whole idea of the abrasiveness and that hard shell of the insect or slug in this case. Don't know whether it works, whether or not I've not seen the science on it, so I can't say, but philosophically, I'm all for it.
In theory, everything works
Yeah,
in practice,
right.
but not in practice, right? Okay, question from Groton. Would shredded recyclable copier paper make suitable mulch in a garden to dissuade weeds from growing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, some of the things people complain about with the newspapers and that sort of thing is, sometimes you get a little wind blowing in South Dakota and that kind of disperses. Yeah, every once in a while we'll have a little bit of that. And so that can be kind of a challenge. Sometimes people kind of wet it down or that sort of thing, or maybe put something else on top of it, a light layer of something. Yeah, the key for any mulch, though, we want to shoot for about 3 to 4 inches deep is kind of where we want to be, and it might work. I don't know, Chris, if you've heard of anything on that either.
No, I mean, I've heard it works, or even you may not even have to shred it if you want to just put layers of it down. It might not blow away as easily, but the same thing, it should work as long as we don't have tons of wind.
Yeah,
so
that's the drawback.
I'm a little confused with mulch because I don't know at what point is there too much there, and I'm going to encourage mold or mice to be hanging out in that. Can you clarify?
Well, 3 to 4 inches is what's recommended. I know one of the things where the rodents are concerned is putting it down too early in the fall. I mean, we want things to be dormant and the ground to be frozen before we put those mulch layers on, so we don't get rodents living in between or forming holes within the soil and the mulch. For the most part, I don't know that you can get extremely deep because we get hot. I mean, it'll dry out, but it helps temper the soil from drying out too fast. So I don't think you need to go beyond 4 inches. It's getting excessive then, but...
You do want the roots to breathe. Those roots need to breathe oxygen, surprisingly, and they're close to the surface, and so we don't want to, suffocate those roots. But I don't think mulches in general, Larry, I don't think they generally increase disease incidence,
No,
right?
Certainly not. The cup I showed you earlier, that was in mulch, but that fungus is not a plant pathogen. The mushroom is growing strictly on the mulch. It's not affecting the plants. In fact, it may be even making some nutrients available to your plants in small amounts. Right, breaking some things down. No, one of the few instances that you may put some compost down around thinking you're mulching things. Sometimes that compost, if it's not composted correctly, can have plant pathogens, can cause some other issues. That's not a very good mulch necessarily, I don't think, but something that's blocking the light, allowing the soil to breathe, straw, newspaper, shredded newspaper, bark, all kinds of. The bark's not a very good, maybe in the vegetable garden, just because it's going to be a problem the next year, maybe. But
grass clippings.
Yeah, even some black plastic that you can buy at the landscape center would be a good idea.
I've heard that called petroleum mulch.
Petroleum mulch. Sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Moving on.
Well, no, that's a good point, though, because some people think it's really organic since it's a plastic, but so that's a whole debate there.
Yep.
But who knows?
Okay. Well, I'll duck that topic, and like I said, moving on. Common household plant pests like aphids, whiteflies, slugs, and snails may infest orchids as well. Garden Line now goes back to the greenhouse with SDSU Entomology Professor Paul J. Johnson to learn more about these orchid pests and how to control them.
Good evening. I'm Paul Johnson, Professor of Entomology from South Dakota State University, and I'm here this evening to tell you a little bit about some of the common house pests, insect pests that you'll have on your home orchids or in your home greenhouse growing situation. And these are some of the same pests that you would find on your other house plants or greenhouse pests. I'm going to show you some examples first of 2 species of scale insects that are some of the most common problems on orchids and other house plants. If you can look real close on this orchid, you can see these white fluffy materials here and some of these harder circular structures down here. These are the females, and up here are the males of what's called the Bois du Val scale. And this is a very common pest on orchids all over the country and over much of the world. And these only come into South Dakota when you buy infested plants. So this is a good example of what you don't want to have when you're buying plants. On this Phalaenopsis orchid here, if we look on the back side, we can see one of the more common pests, which is the brown soft scale. And you can see a variety of small little pale and brownish colored structures there. Those are all the insects. The big one in the middle there is the female, and she is full of eggs. These can be real problems, not so much in that they can kill the plant, but they cause a lot of honeydew, make it unsightly, and can spread to other plants very easily. And these can also spread from your other house plants to these. On this other Phalaenopsis here, we have some excellent examples of slug and snail damage, which is what you can see with the holes, the ragged edges, the browning effects. And these can be real problems when you're putting your plants out of doors during the summer, or keep them in a overly humid greenhouse where you might have slugs and snails building up. Some of the other pests that are of major importance are aphids and white flies, and you can discriminate those very easily with the aphids, just like on your roses. Are small little green soft bodies with little tubercles sticking out of the back end of the abdomen. They produce honeydew, they suck the sap out of the plant. And the white flies, which are the little flying insects that are white colored, and when you brush the plant, it looks like a little snowstorm around your plant. All of these insects and their as pests can be easily controlled with common household things, chemicals such as isopropyl alcohol, plain old rubbing alcohol. You just soak a cotton ball and rub it on the plant very gently, or you can spray it on the foliage of the plant. But do not spray it on the flowers. The alcohol will do a lot of damage to the plant if you do that.
You are watching Garden Line, the show where you can call in and ask your lawn and garden questions to a panel of experts. The phone number 1-866-595-7378. And we had a viewer that emailed in earlier, and we have a couple of photos, and that's great. If you guys can send in some images with your questions in advance, that is wonderful. Okay, caller is from Creighton, South Dakota. Hope you can help us. These are some pictures of some onions that my friend's mom gave her. She called them top setters. Last year they had little onion bulbs on top. This year it looks like they have green onions growing out of the top. Can you tell us what they're called and how and when to use them? Who wants to tackle that? Chris?
I can do that. Yeah, they're a perennial type of onion known as walking onion or Egyptian onions, and they do form the little bulblets up on the top of the plant. You can use them in the spring as green onions. Just cut the green foliage, kind of like chives or something along that line. Otherwise, in the fall, you can harvest the base of the plant or those bulblets up on top like a regular fall onion.
Okay, so if I harvest the top, I can just leave the base and let it come again next spring?
Yep, it'll continue to produce, or you can collect those little bulblets and plant them in your garden just like you would other onions. Space them about 4 to 5 inches apart, and you'll have more, and they'll just multiply and multiply. So
great if you like onions, huh? Larry, you have another sample?
Well,
Let's
sure. Just,
tackle that.
This was a question that was on, I think, a week or two ago. Maybe Chris, maybe you tackled this. I don't know. But this is just out front of the studio here is a nice buckeye tree. And we had a caller mention that they had yellow spots all over their buckeye. Well, this is a good example of that. If you turn the leaf over, and it may not be all that apparent on the camera there, but there are raised pustules on the backside of this buckeye leaf, and they almost look like little yellow horns coming out there. Well, they are. They're an etial horn. This is a rust, and rust fungi often have multiple spore stages. Sometimes we have that on our cedar apple rust, for example. We have one spore state on the apple tree and one on the cedar. This is an example of another kind of rust, and this is the stage that would be analogous to the apple tree. But those yellow spots, they're common on barberry right now, common barberry, if we have any of that. That's stem rust of wheat, believe it or not. And if you have buckthorn in your shelter belt or something like that, you're noticing these, that's actually crown rust of oat. So a couple of important agronomic pests on our landscape plants. And this buckeye rust, I'm not quite sure what the alternate host is, if there even is one. Maybe it...
I don't remember either, but I know the other big question people are asking, what can I do about it?
Oh, yeah, good question. What can you, well, with something like buckeye, there's really not a lot that we recommend. We don't recommend a fungicide, although some of the fungicides would be effective. Certainly, probably not labeled for buckeye rust in most cases, but
is that bad for the tree, or is it going to come back worse next year?
No, it's really more dependent on the environment, how heavy the rust infection each year, but really, no, it's not going to affect the health of that tree. That tree is very green, very healthy otherwise. Those few little spots they require a living host. They want that plant to survive. So in this case, it is a disease, but it's not going to kill the tree. So.
Okay, all right. Moving on, a question from Millbank. Caller thinks she has a pocket gopher in the garden. What can I do to safely get rid of a gopher without harming my vegetables? Is that an insect, or who gets to tackle that?
Get a gopher trap, I guess you could always do that. Otherwise, yeah, I don't know if you can just drive it out. Sometimes I talk about spraying perfume in like mole holes and things like that to scare them away. But trapping and removal is probably the best way. There's several different types of gopher traps out there.
And I think you're supposed to stake down your gopher traps too, so that they don't run off down the. But there's definitely some publications on that show you how to set up your trap.
Is it really?
Well, I think we have on the Garden Line website. I think we have a link to managing four-footed and other large pests in your landscape or acreage. Go to the Garden Line website. I think they should be able to find that link.
It's so much harder to deal with the furry ones as opposed to the little scaly ones. It makes it more challenging. Okay, a question from Volga. What is the way to get rid of bindweed? It's taking over my garden.
Oh, taking over the garden.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's a tough area because obviously spraying's out of the question. All you can do now is, get a good hoe and just keep hacking away at it until you can get into fall. But this is going to be critical. So this fall, when your garden is all done, in fact, maybe a little bit before your garden is done, just kind of let the bindweed go a little bit. And then this fall, when you're all done, spray something like Roundup on that bindweed. And that's a great thing. We've got any perennial type weeds in your garden, creeping jenny, field bindweed, the quack grasses, any of those tough perennials. Just wait till fall, and then when your garden's done, hit them with Roundup, and you should be in good shape there. That'll be the best time to get that herbicide into the roots, that sort of thing. Otherwise, repeated tillage is really the only thing you can do, but sometimes those root segments will regerminate as well. So tough perennials, hit them this fall with Roundup.
Okay, that fall time spraying business.
Yep. And it's a great opportunity. I mean, don't miss the opportunity because it's easy to walk away from your garden and wait till next year. It's no fun anymore. There's no peas to pick or anything. So yeah, but this is a great time to clean it up for next year.
All right, thanks. Question from Brookings. This morning, Tuesday morning, I discovered on an Asiatic lily these distinct black balls on the main stem at every juncture on a leaf stem except for the bottom foot or so. There are several lilies in the same area and only one has these little black balls. They're about 1/4 inch in diameter. They took one off, dissected it. It's fleshy inside. We think this is part of the plant, but what part? We were given these plants, so this is the first season we've had them in the garden.
Okay, yeah, those are bulblets. Just like they form and multiply bulbs underground, they do an above ground bulb, right in the leaf axil, where the leaf attaches to the stem. And so if you wanted to propagate your lily that way, you sure could. And once, about after they finish blooming, those will start to dry and they'll start to drop off the plant. You can collect them then, and then you'd plant them just like you would any other lily bulb, about 4 to 6 inches deep in the ground. Now keep in mind, since they're so small, they're going to take a little bit of time to get enough energy to flower. So it'll probably be 3 years or so before those are going to flower for you.
Are they going to see green poking out of the ground next year, just a little tiny? And that's how it's
the small plants should come out of the ground that next year, but it'll take a while to be able to mature to the point of flowering.
Okay. Another question, this one from Flandreau. There are black and orange bugs on the collar's raspberries. What can they do to get rid of them? Not sure what kind. They don't say what kind.
Yeah, I wonder how big they are. If they are about yay big, 1/2 inch or so, they could be a type of true bug, hemipteran, which is, and they have piercing, sucking mouth parts, and they'll suck the juices out of your raspberries. What they'll also do is, in order to make those juices available to them, they'll inject some saliva. And a lot of times on berries, this is a real problem in that it deforms the fruit and it makes them a lot of problems for people to, just unsightly. Nobody wants to eat a mutant berry, right? So, what to do to get rid of them? I think an insecticide would probably be warranted here, depending on how many you've got out there. And as far as exactly what this critter is, I mean, we're kind of shooting a little bit blind here. Yeah, you could send in a sample.
What's the better way of identifying this?
Bring that into your local county educator.
Which
Great
office
idea.
is that out of?
I believe that's Flandreau.
Okay.
Yes.
Either take it in there at the office, Moody County Extension Office, or if you're up in Brookings, John also has a real strong entomology background, so somebody can identify it. And if all else, take a picture and email it.
Okay.
We could start with that if you didn't want to drive in.
That's the easy, quick way to get started. All right. Another question, and this one is from Platt. Black-eyed Susan has a fungus. What should they do about it?
Well, again, it's hard to tell what they're dealing with there. It might be a fungus. There are a lot of other things going on with plants right now, a lot of bacterial diseases, just because of the rough weather and the wet conditions. Could be a fungus, could be a rust. Black-eyed Susan is susceptible to some rust that we get typically that affect a lot of our aster plants, I guess. Good identification here is key. If they are going to manage that with a home fungicide, something like that, we want to know that we're dealing with a fungus and something that can be managed. So a plant sample to your county office. If they can't help you, then they can get that to our plant diagnostic clinic. That ought to help. But there is a publication online called Managing Plant Diseases in the Home Garden. Don't think it's going to have Black-eyed Susan in there per se, but might give you some ideas. But really, good identification is key there.
It seems like I see a lot of downy mildew on Black-eyed Susans too. And
yep,
Black-eyed Susans can grow pretty thick. Would thinning it be good, or maybe this will just, once things dry up, maybe it'll kind of shape up?
Yeah, I think, especially if you have a really diseased plant all season, I mean, for sure in the fall, we got to get that foliage and that debris out of there. Cutting it back at this time, maybe, and it may be a sign they need to be divided again. Like you're saying, if they're too thick, you'll get some of the fungus or bacteria with the moisture. Again, though, it's hard to say exactly what to spray without knowing, but yeah.
Okay.
Hope for the best. Black-eyed Susans are tough, right? They're almost a weed,
Yeah,
aren't they?
Well,
they're tough.
Beautiful weed.
Yeah, that's right.
Weed is just a plant in the wrong place.
Yeah, that's right.
What I've been told. Okay, question from Clark. They've got problems with their vegetables. They had a 5-year-old compost pile. It hasn't been sprayed, the contents of it, for at least a year. They put it on the garden. The tomato leaves curled. They're looking terrible. Peas stopped growing. Carrots look good. Potatoes look awful. Flower bed got the same compost and looks good. What's wrong with the vegetables? Could it be the compost?
Yeah, it could be. Like we talked about at the beginning of the program, we talked about this, this crabgrass herbicide called quinclorac. That can linger in the grass clippings, and then you would take those and possibly could even survive through the compost process and even still linger, and you put that on your garden, and then you'll see some of these plants curl up. These herbicide things, tomatoes, potatoes, are notorious for being the most sensitive to some of this herbicide injury. So could it come from the compost? It could have come from somewhere else. It could have drifted in. It's hard to say, but some of these herbicides, it depends on where you get your compost from. If you got it from a pasture, sometimes if you got it from, if there was manure that you put in there, sometimes some of these pasture herbicides can, persist even in the manure. They just pass right through the animal and go right out the other end. And so, they can last that way. And sometimes they can last for over a year, even in your garden. And so it's hard to say, but they could send in a sample if they want a more specific analysis of the injury. But that curling and that sort of thing is kind of, a lot of times that is herbicide related.
Do they need to think about getting those damaged plants out of there now, or let them go the rest of the season and just take them out when the growing season's done?
Yeah, that's a tricky issue there. I'd let them go. They may grow out of it. And this is a good issue because we often get this question, especially this year with all the wind and everything, and guys are trying to get the spraying done in the fields, and drifts is happening in some cases. people ask, well, I got a little drift on my garden plants. Can I still eat those vegetables? And a lot of times we recommend no. I mean, there's probably no immediate health danger or anything like that, but the problem is those residues will probably exceed EPA standards, and so we'd recommend not eating those. And so sometimes if those plants are affected, the herbicide can kind of linger in the plant even up until fall. And so depending on the level of the injury and that sort of thing, you kind of want to watch for it, but generally we recommend not to eat those vegetables.
Okay, thanks. Question from Rapid City, a good straightforward one. Is commercial peat moss a good compost? Any takers? Chris?
Well, I mean, sure. It's another form of organic matter that you can add to the soil. It's when you're buying. Keep in mind peat's being taken from bogs, and there's probably a limited resource out there. But peat or your own compost or decomposed plant leaves, I mean, any of that is good organic matter that you can add to your soil.
Okay. Back to the insects. Question from Spearfish. Grasshoppers, the cold, wet spring, they hope that would take care of them, but how do you kill the small ones that have hatched? John?
Well, let's see. As things start to dry out a little bit, you want to have something out there that's green. Grasshoppers like to go to whatever is green in the landscape, and that's what they eat. So if you're trying to keep things out of your garden, plant a little bit of this, what we would call a trap crop of some sort, and then you can localize an insecticide application to that trap crop rather than trying to chase down each and every individual of these little grasshoppers, which you'll never hit them all.
What would be a good trap crop? I think grasshoppers are real general feeders, so something that grows fairly quick, and maybe like an alfalfa or something like that, or clover or something like that would work out real well. Okay. Question from Arlington. The evergreen trees, the new growth is curling up. It's a blue spruce, 5 years old, planted 5 years ago when it was about 3 feet tall. So
you said 5 years old?
Yeah.
You know, there's a couple different things that could do that. I will say probably to send a sample in of that. Poor drainage, maybe herbicide, different things could do that. So I'd need to see a picture maybe of what's going on, or a branch. A lot of times with a branch on your tree, especially evergreens, a 1 to 2 foot chunk of branch is really helpful in identifying these problems.
Okay. Larry, are there any diseases that you need to worry about with?
There are plenty of diseases on spruce, but some major ones, but not that fit the description that they're talking about. Again, a sample or some photos would be nice. Yeah, I think you're probably on the ball with some environmental issues.
Okay. Rain question from Sioux Falls. The potato plants are laying on the ground. The plants were up 15 to 18 inches. It's rained, but they were laying on the ground before the rain. What happened? The wind got them, or what?
Well, they might have just gotten beat down. You know, I was gone when we got the really heavy rain, but there was a lot of things flopped in my yard too. So just the heavy rainfall. Give them a couple days and see if they'll pop back up, but you might even just be able to do some of the mounding like you would typically do with your potato plants. I mean, we want to mound soil up around our potato plants anyway to get more tuber production. So see if they don't lift up here in the next week, I would try to lift them up by putting some soil and burying them a little bit.
Okay. Question from Brookings. What is the best way to remove a tick? I'm throwing this at you.
Let's see. So yeah, make sure you get the head, I guess, is the bottom line. You want to just slowly kind of pull that baby off of there, and generally that works pretty well. If you have a real fine tweezers or something like that, pulling it out real nice and slow so that the head comes off with it. And then just inspect it afterwards, you know, maybe clean it up with a little bit of ethanol or alcohol or something like that, just to make sure it doesn't get infected. But
now, the type of ticks we have around here in South Dakota, they're visible, they're a little bigger. What kind are they? What are they called?
So we generally would, I mean, what's in the news is the American dog tick, which is the big one that yes, we all know when you're walking through in the spring, if you walk through through the brush or something like that, you, your kids, and your dog are all covered in them, right? The other one that's a little bit more concerned, the American dog tick doesn't really do anything besides get big and really disgusting. The one that's a little bit more of a problem for us and transmits some Lyme disease is the deer tick, which is a very small little black speck, more or less. I mean, it's, you know, maybe 1 millimeter long. Very difficult to find. And as far as identifying and comparing and contrasting the two, I think we've got some nice materials on the extension websites in order to do that.
I got a question. Is it really necessary to use fire? It seems like some people...
Oh, well, it feels really good to see that sucker pop.
But you gotta wonder what's worse, the tick or the burn?
Oh, no, don't use it. No, don't actually put fire close to your skin.
Oh,
no,
okay.
no, that's what you do with it after it's off of you and it's kind of squirming there.
These people, they put fire near it as if it would withdraw.
No, just pull it out.
I gotta cut things
all
now.
right.
We gotta wrap this up. As you can tell, that's all the time we have for this evening. And just to let you know, Garden Line repeats twice each week on South Dakota Public Broadcasting's Digital Channel 3. It's also known as the Create Channel. The encore broadcast can be seen Thursdays at 11 a.m. Central and Saturdays at 4 p.m. Central. Check your local listings to find that SDPB digital channel where you live. That's all the time we have tonight, so thanks to our panel of experts. John Lundgren, USDA Research Entomologist, Chris DeRostov, Minnehaha County Extension Horticulture Educator, Larry Osborne, Extension Plant Pathologist, and Mike Mechnig, I can say this real fast, Extension Weed Specialist. Thanks to you for calling in. We'll see you next week.
This program is funded in part by Swiftel Communications.